Welcome back for another week of Power Rankings. And let's take a look at the NHL standings before we get to the Power Rankings with where we're at right now. St. Louis, Colorado, and Winnipeg are the top three teams in the Central. Edmonton, Arizona, and Vancouver are the top three teams in the Pacific. Keep in mind there's teams that have games in hand that will knock these teams out if they win those games in hand, but that's where we're at right now. The wild cards are Dallas and Calgary. Yes, Dallas is back in a playoff position. So outside the playoffs are Anaheim, Nashville, San Jose, Vegas, Chicago, LA, and Minnesota right now. So in the playoffs that weren't last year are all three of the top three teams in the Pacific, Edmonton, Arizona, and Vancouver. And falling out of the playoffs so far, Nashville, San Jose, and Vegas. Now on the eastern side of things, Washington, New York, the Islanders, and Carolina are your top three. All of them made the playoffs last year. In the Atlantic, Boston, Montreal, and Florida are the top three. Montreal and Florida both missed the playoffs last year. And your wild cards are Pittsburgh and Philly. Philly missed the playoffs last year as well. So that's three teams in the East and three teams in the West. And that's usually how things work out. At the end of the year, you usually see two or three in each conference that made it that missed the year before. So missing the playoffs right now are Buffalo, Toronto, Tampa Bay, the Rangers, New Jersey, Columbus, Ottawa, and Detroit. So again, you have some teams that have a lot of games in hand on others. And when things even out, some of these teams will probably fall out. But it is interesting to see Toronto, Tampa, and Columbus out of the playoffs. Montreal, Florida, and Philly being in the playoffs. So that's where we're at right now, and I wanted to go over that before we get into the power rankings. Number 31, moving down 2 spots from where they were last week and the week before, is Minnesota. Now here's where it gets tricky. Minnesota's not playing badly overall, but they've been outplayed by the other two teams that are in this row over the last week, in my eyes. And so it gets really, really tricky to try to figure out, well, who's the lowest. And there's other teams that will likely drop down into this row. But for right now, Minnesota's 31. They might be the best 31 we've had all season. Number 30, moving up 1 spot from last week. They're on a bit of a winning streak. And that is the LA Kings. Yes, the Los Angeles Kings. That's their logo from the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. I figured I'd throw some old logos on the board tonight because why not? And so for the Kings, nice winning streak. One of them's over Detroit, so you take it with a grain of salt. But overall, things are getting better for the Kings while they tell Kopitar to maybe go play somewhere else. That might be good for him. Number 29, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Detroit. So very good road trip for Detroit. And now they get to go home. I think their next game is on Tuesday night at home. And we'll see whether or not Detroit can put some wins together. Now, they took the shootout loss against San Jose tonight. But just coming back in that and, and all of that other wonderful stuff, Detroit not giving up. And they're not number 31. That's the highest they've been on this chart in 4 weeks. 4 weeks ago, they were 27th. Number 28, dropping 1 spot from last week. Sad, isn't it? So off of that huge high they would have had over being 27th, I'm sure the boys went out and had drinks and everything. This week they're down to 28th. So Ottawa, not in that bottom row, but perilously close to it. And again, it's other teams in this area are playing pretty well. And what we're seeing right now is, this happens every year, the teams that have the really poor records, they'll have some good streaks along the way. And by the end of the year, their record is, 62, 65 points. It's not nearly as bad as it looks like it's going to be at the start of the year. It's just once you've dug yourself into that hole, it's really hard to dig your way back out. Number 27, moving up 1 spot from last week, is New Jersey. Nice gutsy win tonight in overtime in Montreal. Montreal fans will debate whether or not that game should have gone to overtime at all. And, of course, they had the nice win over Vancouver, a team that appears to be in a bit of a nosedive themselves. So New Jersey showing signs of potentially moving up, I would think, next week. Because there are some teams who could find themselves in trouble next week. Number 26, same spot as last week. The only team that didn't play tonight was Columbus. There's an interesting little factoid as well. On, I think it's April 6th, all 30 teams play again except Columbus. So we have another day of 15 games, and Columbus gets that night off as well. Cue the conspiracy theories. But for Columbus, they had that win over St. Louis. But their overall record has been I think worthy of this 26th overall. You see where they are in the overall standings. They're only ahead of Ottawa and Detroit in the East. So when I see that, I go, yeah, no, that makes sense. And they're tied with New Jersey for the same amount of points. So technically, New Jersey's put ahead of Columbus on the NHL app. For me, yeah, you could barely get a piece of paper in between these two in my power rankings. If you want to put New Jersey ahead of Columbus, go for it. Number 25, dropping from number 20 last week, which was down from 14 the week before. So these guys have dropped 11 spots in 2 weeks. And that's Anaheim. And it would have got worse if they'd lost tonight against St. Louis. But they beat St. Louis, so they pulled themselves out of, I'll say, 27th. Which is where they probably would have ended up if St. Louis had done what we thought St. Louis would do, which is defeat Anaheim. We just didn't count on John Gibson coming out and going, no, I've got this. I'll do it. And so Gibson stops them from falling further. But yeah, Anaheim's had a real struggle lately with scoring goals, keeping goals out of their net. Everything that you could imagine that could go wrong has gone wrong for them over the last 2 weeks' time. And tonight's win might be the start of something else. Maybe just falling to 9-2 wakes them up, or at least wakes up Gibson and he puts them on his back again. But we'll see. Because right now, they are below that playoff line. Number 24. Same spot as last week. Exact same spot for them, and that's the New York Rangers. Really all over the place. They lost tonight in Florida. They've had some good wins. They've had some rough losses. And it's just night-to-night consistency. Sometimes their goaltending looks fantastic, and other nights, not as much. So for the Rangers, that 9-3 loss against Tampa, that's a rough one. But I don't think it caused them to fall below any of these other teams. And when you look at the overall standings, they're outside the playoffs, but they've played less games than some of the teams in front of them. So if they could just win a couple. Number 23. Dropping from 14 last week. They were 14 last week, 17 the week before. And dropping 9 spots, Toronto. Just free fall. Absolute free fall for the Leafs. And they've played 22 games. So while they're sitting outside the playoffs, and you can make the argument Tampa's played less games than most of the teams in front of them, Buffalo's played less games as well. Toronto doesn't have that luxury. They are sitting outside the playoffs, even though most other teams have played less games than they have. That's a horrible combination right there. And we're only 22 games into the season, but another way to look at it is you've got 60 left. And we start getting into, by the end of November, where the number of games you got left, it gets kind of dicey. Yes, absolutely. St. Louis was terrible, and Carolina had really, really bad spots last year, and they had that comeback. But in the case of St. Louis, they needed a coaching change to make that comeback. And with Carolina, they had a really exciting, fantastic thing going on, and eventually it led to winning. Toronto just seems to be in a malaise right now. And I don't know how you get out of that. I really don't. I don't know how Toronto breaks out of this. There isn't any one spot on the team that I can look at right now and say, well, that's going really, really well for them. Matthews is playing well. And yeah. Janssen needs to stop taking bad penalties. Toronto's got some problems along the way here. And now there's talk of Tyson Barrie potentially being on his way out of town before or at the deadline. There was talk about that tonight on Hockey Night in Canada. So, things for Toronto could potentially lead to a major shakeup. And they need a major shakeup right now. Number 22, moving up from 25 last week. Nice winning streak going on for them. And for San Jose, they're back to 500. So they're back to where they had hoped to be at the start of the season. They're not in the playoffs, but they're at least ahead of 4 teams right now in the West. And so for them, things are getting better. And so they're on the verge of breaking into this third row. And I'm going to say right now, if they keep playing the way they've been playing, they're in the third row next week. Without Jones's numbers getting a lot better. I keep waiting for Martin Jones's numbers to come up, but it's just they're scoring a lot. And Karlsson seems to be getting better, and I think their fortunes from here will be tied to how well Erik Karlsson is playing. And he's played better the last couple of weeks than he had been playing. Number 21. Moving up from 23 and tying the highest they've been all year is Chicago. Chicago pulling their way out of this mess they've been in. They are down here on the overall standings, but again, have played less games than some of the other teams in the West. And tonight's win over Nashville seemed to be kind of a statement game. Now, whether it was a statement game for them or a statement game for Nashville, and it's not a good statement for Nashville if that was a statement game, is up to others to decide. But for me, Toronto at 21, Toronto's at 23, Chicago at 21 works. I did go over this board a lot tonight. I went over this during the games. I went over it this afternoon. I went over it again before I posted it. I did make some alterations to it because there were some teams I felt I had a little bit lower than I wanted them and some teams I felt were a little bit higher than I wanted them. So Chicago at 21 works for me. Now at 20, down from 13 last week, Vancouver. You know, I got this Johnny Canuck magnet at in the Canucks store at the Devils game, Canucks versus Devils, and I thought, yeah, I can't wait to debut this on the power rankings. I didn't expect to show it this soon. Now they came back and tied Colorado, but they really shouldn't have needed to. You have them down to their number 3 or 4 goaltender, depending on how you see Werner in that organization, and you're at home. And you're having this miserable month where you've won 2 out of 8 games. It's now 2 out of 9. So Vancouver is in a free fall. And while they're in a playoff spot, they are not in a position where they have games in hand on pretty much anybody right now. Maybe Calgary. Calgary's in a pretty rough position as well because there are teams that are below them. But the Pacific has lost its early domination. The early dominant pattern we saw for the Pacific has completely died off. Number 19, dropping from number 9 last week. They're down 10 spots. And this is what you call a good old-fashioned market adjustment. So Vegas, I gave them the benefit of the doubt last week. They're not getting any benefit of the doubt this week. And from what I've been reading from Vegas fans, they're not entirely happy with the way things are going right now. This is where things get weird because 2.5 years ago, when Vegas drafted this team, what did we say? That's a weak defense. This is a team that might have some offense, but not a lot of depth. And their goaltending, Fleury's great, but who's the backup? That's what was said about the Vegas Golden Knights when the Golden Band of Misfits was put together. And now they're kind of playing the way that everybody thought they would when they were an expansion team. This is kind of what we thought. Their defense wouldn't be able to score. They'd have some problems there. They'd be in almost every game they were in, but they would not be able to win the game in the end. And right now they've lost more games than they've won overall. So, yeah, I don't know. We're in a bizarre place right now with Vegas where they're finally looking like what people had expected them to be in their first year. We'll see how long this continues like this. Number 18. Moving up from 22 last week, so I know their fan base hasn't been happy with their placement. I have Florida at 18th, so they are slowly making some headway. Florida is ahead of 4 teams that they were behind last week, minimum. I think they've passed more than, but other teams may have moved ahead of them as well. But for Florida, they're getting it together. Winning in regulation tonight, good. I've wanted to see some wins in regulation. I've wanted to see a game that didn't involve crazy changes in momentum where they have a 3-goal lead and lose it, or they have to come from 3 goals back. And tonight, while they exchange goals with the Rangers pretty regularly, this was a pretty good game overall for them. And the fact that they get the victory in regulation, I thought it's nice for them going forward. And Florida is in a playoff spot right now. They're number 3 in the Atlantic. Now again, they are not exactly in a position of great strength over Buffalo, but right now they're ahead of them. Number 17, dropping from number 15 last week. Calgary's having some problems. And the 3-0 shutout loss against Arizona is just the latest frustration for the Flames. That frustration kind of boiled over, and then Kemper didn't take any of that crap. And Kemper let them know that in no uncertain terms. I'm not sure what it is with goaltenders right now, but I'm kind of liking goaltenders having this attitude and being willing to fight for themselves. What that does, and I can mention this with the Flames because Riddick does this as well. What that does is it means that you get more respect from players. Where players might crash the crease and run over, say, a Markstrom. They might crash the crease and run over Fleury. They might run over a Gibson. If they know Riddick's going to stick them in the face as soon as they try it, they might think twice. And it's the old Billy Smith rule. Billy Smith didn't get run because he'd take your block off. And maybe with guys like Kemper and Riddick, maybe we're seeing some of that coming back with goaltenders. Make the guy pay the price. Let him know you're not going to put up with that in the crease. So, Calgary at number 17. That loss against Arizona was tough. And again, Johnny Gaudreau has been very visibly frustrated with this run lately. Number 16, moving up from 21 last week. I know Jets fans weren't happy about their placement over the last few weeks. I've moved them up as they've started to really play better. And I'm starting to see some things that I really like about the Jets recently. And so they move up to 16. They also benefit from the fact that Vegas and the Canucks are not winning anything. Jets right now are third in their division. And who wouldn't want to see the Jets and the Avalanche in that first round? Not to mention Arizona and Vancouver would be a fun first round as well. Or St. Louis and the Flames, Edmonton and Dallas. Edmonton and Dallas, that's an old rivalry from long time ago that I remember because I'm old from a long time ago. Number 15, moving up from 17 last week, is Carolina. These guys are winning against lesser teams, so they're winning, and hopefully this leads to a turnaround. I like Carolina. I really do. I like Carolina's roster a lot. I do want to see more consistency from that roster than what we've seen over the last while. Reimer finally, got a win after four straight decisions against him. So maybe he can, at 3-4, he can get it 4-4 and get some confidence. Because when Reimer's confident, he's a pretty good goaltender. It's just his confidence gets kind of shaky at times. So we'll see if they can bump up into the top two rows next week. Number 14, moving up from 19 last week, is Philly. Now, they lost the 3-goal lead against the Islanders, but they had a 3-goal lead against the Islanders going into the third. So again, glass half empty, glass half full. You guys can make a decision on that. For me, the Flyers are full value for being the number 2 wild card, and I could definitely see them in a top 3 position in that division, that being Carolina. I can't see anybody catching the Islanders and the Capitals right now. I just don't see it. It looks like they're ready to run away and hide as the top 2 teams and fight it out amongst themselves as to who's going to be number 1 in the Metro. Who saw that coming? No. The Flyers, pretty solid run they've been on. Hart now looks better than Elliott because this is kind of how things are working with Philly right now. But Elliott had a decent game until the third period, and they eventually lost it, but we'll see what that does for them going forward. For right now, I have them in the top 2 rows. Number 13, dropping from 6 last week, is Nashville. Now, I could treat the 9-4 loss against Colorado as a one-off, but then they have the 7-2 loss against Chicago. That's 2 really one-sided defeats in less than 2 weeks. And Nashville's goaltending, which should be their greatest strength, hasn't appeared to be their greatest strength recently. And that loss they took against Chicago tonight was quite startling. And the fact they're not in a playoff spot right now. And again, I know things are going to change, but Nashville was a team that myself and a lot of others thought, well, they should be first in their division. Adding Duchesne should make a difference. It should help. And it just doesn't look like it's working. So we'll see if Nashville ends up making a trade, because David Poyle's never shy about making deals. And this is a team that's built to win right now. Not later, right now. So they kind of need to turn this thing around before it gets any uglier. Number 12, down from number 11 last week, so they're only down 1 spot, is Buffalo. And Buffalo's one I went back and forth on. So Buffalo has now won tonight with that win against Ottawa. They had lost 6 in a row. Not all of them in regulation, and against some decent teams. So for me, Buffalo drops to 12. I wasn't going to drop them any further down. We'll see how things turn out for them this week. If they have another miserable week, I can see Philadelphia, Carolina, Winnipeg potentially all passing them. Again, this board is in pretty wide states of flux right now, because it feels like teams that were hot in October suddenly aren't, and vice versa. Teams that were cold in October seem to be heating up in November, which happens every year. Of course, Buffalo fans are probably a little jumpy because they're seeing their team out of the playoffs after a really strong start to the season, and that happened last year too. And it would feel like it's happening all over again. The more alarming thing to me is it does look like Dahlin's in kind of a sophomore slump. So if he doesn't pull out of that, it does make it a lot harder for them to make the playoffs. Number 11, moving up from 18 last week, and this is the highest they've been, is Dallas. Dallas is playing some of its best hockey on the season. They started the season 1-7-1. Since then, they're 10-1-1. They came through Western Canada, won all three. So they're 10-1-1 in their last 12. Jamie Benn is playing better. And we saw tonight that Ben Bishop gets pulled, and Hudobin went in and stole the show. Hudobin was very good in Vancouver as well the other night. So the overall picture for Dallas is brighter and brighter. They're in a playoff spot. They could very well knock Winnipeg down. Colorado, while they've had a couple of wins over the last 3 games, Colorado is not completely invulnerable, as long as you can stop McKinnon, which is tricky. But yeah, Dallas, nice road trip. Really nice road trip. And overall, that was their Achilles heel last year, and this year it looks like maybe it isn't. And they're 3 games above 500. They're having a very good run. Number 10, moving up from 12 last week, is Pittsburgh. You know, Pittsburgh, for me, the respect that I have for the Penguins, considering the number of injuries they go through and how many key guys get hurt, and they still find ways to win. Tonight against Toronto was just a huge statement game. That was massive. Without Crosby, they scored 6 goals. I shudder to think of how many they would have scored if Crosby had been in the lineup tonight against Toronto. So for Pittsburgh, they're still in a playoff spot. They still look like they're going the right direction. And if they ever get healthy, and at this point we're into if category because we're a quarter of the way through the season and they haven't been healthy yet. But if they get healthy, Pittsburgh right now looks like they could be a Stanley Cup contender. So yeah, they're number 10. Number 9, moving up from 16 last week, is Montreal. A lot of slings and arrows thrown my way by Montreal fans over the last couple of weeks. This week, they showed it. They showed that they can win big games against good teams. Now, they lost a lead against New Jersey, and they lost that one against New Jersey, but for me, while that was a statement for New Jersey that things are getting better, I was surprised Danault's goal didn't count. If Danault's goal had counted, they win that game. So for me, it gets to overtime. I didn't penalize them based on that, as I said in the review. Not penalizing Montreal for that. They're playing very, very well. And the scary thing is they don't really have a big star name. They don't have a big name guy. Right now, they've thrown Drouin on the IR. But since it's been a team effort to get to where they're at, I don't see that as a reason to drop them down right now. I think they're still playing well, and I think without Drouin, they can still win. And they showed that tonight. It went off Danault's knee, and Toronto decided that constituted a goal being kicked in. Other than that, they would have won the game. Number 8, and they stayed the same spot they were last week, and that's Tampa. The 9-3 win over the Rangers was really, really nice. Then they followed that up by losing at home against Winnipeg. So they were in the top row coming into today, and that's changed. So for Tampa Bay, I think 8 spot's the right spot for them. They look dominant sometimes, then they don't. And we'll see whether or not they can consistently achieve results that warrant me throwing them back into the top row. Like I said, they were in the top row coming into today, and they dropped out of it. Now, at number 7, moving up from 10 last week, I don't know that Arizona's ever been this high in my power rankings in the 3 years I've done this. In the 3 years that this channel's done power rankings, I don't think Arizona's ever been this high up. And it is very, very impressive watching the Arizona Coyotes go on this run. Now, keep in mind that when I see shootout wins, I kind of treat it like it's a tie. And I do that because a shootout goal isn't the same as a hockey play. So I'm more wanting to reward a team that won the game in regulation than a team that wins in shootouts. Because again, there's a reason the NHL now to get into the playoffs, the first tiebreaker is regulation wins. Now, regulation and overtime, that's changed to regulation wins. So I kind of view it the same way. Like, the regulation wins are more impressive. But for Arizona, they're winning so much. They're losing so little. Kemper, again, was dominant tonight again, or this afternoon against Calgary. I can't have them any lower than 7th right now. So they jumped past Tampa today. Good job. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from where they were last week, and that's Colorado. Even though they've lost their top two goaltenders, we're waiting on Grubauer to return and Francouz, and yet they're still number 6. That's a testament to how strong an organization you have in Colorado, that they're down to either their third or fourth goaltender, depending on how you see Bibeau and Werner, and they're without Rantanen, they're without Landeskog, and yet they're still cobbling together points. When they get healthy, holy crap, these guys are going to be great. So Colorado, who at the start of the year I said I see them being Stanley Cup finalists. I think I had them as second in their division, behind Nashville. So far, so good. In fact, they're second. They're just not behind Nashville. They're behind St. Louis. But yeah, this is a real team that's going to be very, very dangerous for the rest of the way. Number 5, moving up from 7 last week, are the McDavids. I say that because people are going to be like, what about Draisaitl? I know, Draisaitl's been excellent. Part of the reason that Draisaitl absolutely excels in this is because everybody focuses on McDavid. It's perfect for Draisaitl. Draisaitl doesn't score 42 points in 21 games if he's playing for Philadelphia or if he's playing in Florida or if he's playing for Columbus. He scores 42 points in 21 games playing with McDavid. He does this knowing that all of the attention is going to be on McDavid. I'm thinking McDavid gets more attention on the ice than he does as well. It all works out perfect for the Edmonton Oilers so far, and perfect for those two guys, who are now being talked about as the same sentence as Gretzky and Curry. I don't think of it that way, though. I would more closely compare them to Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr. That's the one that it sort of reminds me more of. But that's still fantastic company to be in either way, right? Or maybe even Kevin Stevens and Lemieux when Stevens was at his best, although Stevens was a fighter and an agitator as well. So yeah, the Oilers, number 5. They are not going away. They're not dropping. Number 4, these guys dropped one spot this week. 1. St. Louis, because of a couple of setbacks they had this week, I dropped them to number 4. But the top 4, things are just so close that I dropped them to 4. They could easily be 3 by Tuesday. Number 3 is Boston. Might be the shakiest number 3 we've had this season. I say that because, Boston, they eke out a point today against the Capitals because Halak dragged them there. They got the win over Toronto this week, but still, I don't see Boston playing anywhere near as well in November as they did in October. And I could see the Oilers, I could see Arizona being as high as 3 at this time next week. This is a league that there's a lot of parity. And I think it shows in the fact that even the top teams, you can kind of find some flaws here and there. Again, with St. Louis, I think it's just they've gone on this really long streak. And it can be really tough to maintain that. Number 2, which will reveal what number 1 is. They dropped from number 1 last week, and that's the Capitals. So the Capitals are at number 2. Excellent week for them overall, and just their month's been great. But number 1 is the Islanders, who with that comeback win over the Flyers, maintained that number 1 spot they've occupied for the last few days. So the Capitals escaped from Boston with 2 points. Boston gets that 1 point because Halak's fantastic. And the Islanders came back from 3 goals down against Philly to come back and win that one in a shootout. It's a tremendous run that both the Islanders and the Capitals are on. It's almost as if they're in their own league and everybody else is just playing to catch up to them. Although St. Louis, during their winning streak, where they'd won 9 out of 10, pretty impressive run for them as well. And I think they'll get it back together. The loss to Anaheim tonight, it's hard to do that for that long. And Gibson just kind of stole a game. I do wonder, too, with Binnington, are they going to overplay him? Now, I know Allen started the last game, but are we going to end up in a situation where Binnington's going to be overplayed? Keep in mind, he went on a great run in the second half last season, but he's never been a starting goaltender in the National Hockey League for an entire 82-game schedule. The pressure's completely different than it is in a playoff run where it's unexpected. Now he's expected to be excellent night in and night out and play 55, 60 games. So there you go. Your power rankings for November 16th of 2019. And as you see, some teams are achieving new highs, some are achieving new lows, And that's what the high-low is for. I haven't updated it with tonight's because that would give it away. People would zoom in and go, oh, look, Shannon's got this team. And they were at that last week. So, yeah. Overall, again, the parity in this league is fantastic. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon.